The air hung heavy in the cramped flat, thick with the smell of stale cigarettes and unwashed dishes. Charlie sat hunched over the table, a half-empty bottle of cheap beer sweating beside him. His head pounded, a dull ache that mirrored the feeling in his chest. He glanced around the room, his gaze snagging on the overflowing ashtray, the clothes strewn across the floor, the general disarray that had become their life. The walls seemed to press in, suffocating him. He felt trapped, caged in this life he hadn't wanted, a life that felt more like a prison sentence than a partnership. He closed his eyes, willing himself to find some semblance of peace, but the anger simmered just below the surface, a pot on the verge of boiling over. The door creaked open and Sally sauntered in, her lipstick smeared, her words slurred. She swayed slightly, catching herself on the back of a chair. "You're still here," she said, her voice a mixture of surprise and annoyance. Her gaze swept over him, taking in his rumpled clothes, his defeated posture. "Where else would I be?" Charlie asked, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "Don't start, Charlie," Sally snapped, her voice rising. "Not tonight." "Why not tonight?" he shot back, the anger finally bubbling over. "Every night is the same. You waltz in here, drunk and oblivious, and expect me to be happy about it." "It's just a few drinks with friends," she mumbled, turning away from him. "You're acting like a child." "A child?" he laughed, a harsh, empty sound. "I'm the one holding this mess together, Sally. I'm the responsible one." "Oh, here we go," Sally said, rolling her eyes. "The responsible one. Always the martyr." The words struck a nerve, deep and raw. He felt a surge of rage, hot and blinding, and before he could stop himself, he was on his feet, his hands reaching for her. He didn't mean to hurt her, not really, but the anger had a life of its own, a force he couldn't control. His hands closed around her throat, his fingers digging into her flesh. Sally's eyes widened in surprise, then fear. She clawed at his hands, her nails scraping against his skin, but her struggles were weak, futile. He watched as the fight drained from her eyes, replaced by a blankness that chilled him to the core. He released his grip and she crumpled to the floor, a lifeless heap at his feet. For a moment there was only silence, a heavy, oppressive silence that seemed to amplify the pounding of his heart. He stared down at Sally's still form, his mind struggling to process what he'd done. He felt nothing, no remorse, no guilt, only a strange emptiness that settled over him like a shroud. And then the world shifted. A low rumble like a distant train vibrated through the air. The floor beneath him swayed, and a picture clattered to the ground, the glass shattering into 1,000 pieces. The rumbling grew louder, more insistent, and the walls began to groan in protest. It was an earthquake. Panic surged through him, a primal instinct that momentarily overshadowed the horror of what he'd done. He stumbled back from Sally's body, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. The room bucked and swayed, and dust rained down from the ceiling, filling the air with a choking haze. Objects toppled from shelves, crashing to the floor with sickening thuds. The lights flickered, then died, plunging the room into darkness. He could hear the terrified screams of his neighbors, their voices muffled by the walls. The earthquake seemed to last an eternity, each tremor a hammer blow to his already frayed nerves. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The rumbling faded, replaced by an eerie silence that was somehow more terrifying than the chaos that had preceded it. He stood there, frozen in place, his ears straining for any sound, any sign that the world hadn't ended. Dust motes danced in the faint light filtering in from the window, creating an otherworldly glow. He took a tentative step, then another, his feet crunching over broken glass and debris. He made his way to the window and peered out into the street below. The air was thick with dust, obscuring the buildings across the street. People stumbled out of their homes, their faces pale with shock and fear. He watched as a car alarm blared incessantly, a jarring sound in the otherwise quiet night. He turned away from the window, his gaze drawn back to Sally's body. The dust had settled over her, covering her like a macabre shroud. He couldn't see her face, couldn't see the accusation in her lifeless eyes. He stumbled back to the table and sank into the chair, his legs feeling like lead. He stared at his reflection in the dusty surface of the table, barely recognizing the haggard, wild-eyed man staring back at him. He looked like a stranger, a monster. What had he done? The question echoed through his mind, but there was no answer. Only a hollow emptiness where his soul should have been. He had taken a life, snuffed out a flame that had once burned bright, and the world hadn't even flinched. In fact, the world had conspired to hide his crime, burying it beneath a mountain of rubble and dust. A flicker of something akin to guilt pricked his conscience, but he quickly pushed it down, burying it deep beneath the fear and confusion that threatened to overwhelm him. He told himself it was an accident, a momentary lapse in judgment. He hadn't meant to kill her, but the lie rang hollow in his ears. He knew the truth. He had killed her. In a fit of rage, he had taken her life, and now he would have to live with the consequences. He closed his eyes, trying to block out the image of Sally's lifeless face, but it was no use. It was seared into his memory, a permanent stain on his soul. He stood up and walked over to the window, gazing out at the devastation the earthquake had wrought. The world was in chaos, but somehow he felt strangely calm. The earthquake had changed everything. It had given him a clean slate, a chance to start over. But could he? Could he truly outrun the darkness that lurked within him? He didn't know the answer. All he knew was that he was different now. The earthquake had shattered more than just buildings and streets. It had shattered something inside of him, something he wasn't sure could ever be repaired. He was a killer now, and he wasn't sure what that meant for his future.